Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea Lee. I'm a professor at Austin Peay State University in the United States, and my presentation is on discussing refugee experiences in the English language classroom. So first, a little bit of background information about myself. I lived in South Korea for about 11 years. I was an English language instructor, and I taught North Korean refugees. The first time in 2009, I believe, I was teaching at a university in Seoul, and I had some North Korean refugee students enrolled in my class. And initially, I didn't know that they were from North Korea, but over time, I learned a little bit more about their background, and they shared, more and more over time with me, and I still remain in communication with some of them. I also work with charity organizations and an NGO that assist North Korean refugees and also aim to promote awareness of various human rights violations that take place in North Korea. So when I was teaching in South Korea, I did sometimes include activities related to refugees, especially North Korean refugees, since the topic is a little bit closer to the students. So how I did this, I included readings and videos on North Korean refugees, as well as general refugee experiences. I also created lessons dedicated to the refugee experience, specifically on World Refugee Day, and also there's a week dedicated to North Korean human rights. I also developed group discussion activities related to refugees' experiences, and I adapted some K-12 unification education curriculum that was actually created by the South Korean government, and I used it with some of my university students. So there were different resources available, sometimes a little bit more difficult, so I would just modify as needed, especially the English, so that my students could understand the content. And I've included some sample resources here on North Korean refugees, if this is something that you're interested in. The first is a link about North Korean refugees, what happens when they go to the South. Sometimes, even though they're in a new country, they have a lot of freedoms, it's very difficult for them to adapt. I've also included a link with some helpful books and resources from the South Korean government, a helpful TED Talk, another interesting one, why North Korean defectors return to one of the world's most repressive regimes, and finally, policy on North Korean defectors. So just a little bit of background information if you are interested in the North Korean refugee experience. And these are some books specifically on North Korean refugees: Escape from Camp 14, The Aquariums of Pyongyang, The Girl with Seven Names, Dear Leader, In Order to Live 1,000 Miles to Freedom, and Under the Same Sky. So most of my background has been in North Korean refugees and their experiences, but I also wanted to create a presentation today on the general refugee experience. So we're going to start with a lesson plan, and I'm going to go through each part step by step. So the first part is a warm-up activity, video, listening and discussion questions, a vocabulary activity, a reading reflection journaling, a group project, then some key takeaways, what the students learned, followed by a homework assignment. So first, the target age or level. This is truly meant for university or adult students, also intermediate to advanced students. I know this can be a complex topic and it might be a little bit difficult for beginner or pre-intermediate students, but just keep in mind too that lessons can be adapted for other age groups or even levels. Some planning considerations: when we do talk about sensitive issues, ensure that students listen to other viewpoints respectfully. Maybe not all students have the same opinion, and this happened when I was teaching about North Korean refugees in South Korea. Some students don't want to talk about that at all. They look at it as a political issue rather than a human issue. So we just have to be cautious in how we approach these topics. Students may also have strong emotions about certain topics. Think carefully about how you will respond to these situations. Also, make sure you leave time for reflection. There is a lot to think about, and students need to be able to process what they're thinking about, what they're learning. And finally, consider the diversity of your students when implementing assignments or activities. So when I talked about the refugee experience, I often talked about North Korean refugees because I was teaching in South Korea, but we did talk about other refugee populations. So consider your students' backgrounds more when you are planning an assignment or activity related to refugees. All right, next, this is the warm-up activity. You can keep it simple. So I would just put some questions on the whiteboard or have them projected on a screen. So first question, what do you already know about refugees? And it's okay if students don't know anything, or maybe they can't communicate that in English. And have you heard any stories in the news about refugees? So I would give the students about 5 minutes to just think about these questions. If they want to jot down some ideas, they can. That's all right. You could also just say after 3 minutes, I'm going to ask for volunteers, and then students can share whatever thoughts come to mind and just encourage them to communicate what they already know. And if students are shy, that's okay. They can just write some ideas down too if they're afraid to speak. All right, then I would show a video, Who is a Refugee? And because it's only just a couple of minutes, I'll go ahead and share it with you right now so you have the background information that the students are going to get as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at the video that the students would watch. All right, now let's go ahead and take a look at the video, Who is a Refugee? It's just a few minutes, and this is what the students would be watching.
Refugees are ordinary people who live through extraordinary times. In the country they live in, conflict or persecution have put them at risk. They have no other choice but to flee and to leave their country to seek safety. This means leaving a lot behind, one of the hardest decisions a person can ever take. So what makes a person a refugee? Refugees are no longer in their own country and have crossed at least one border. Ongoing conflict may put them at risk if they return, or they are at risk of persecution because of their nationality, race, or sexual orientation, or because they associate with a religion, a social group, or a political opinion. Some get jailed, or harmed physically, or mentally. Refugees often flee with no more than the clothes on their back and leave behind their everyday life. They may lose their home, their savings, their career, and often their family and loved ones. The journey to safety can be long and full of dangers. During the journey, people can get hurt, and sadly, many lose their lives. All of this can cause severe trauma. Fortunately, there are international laws to protect refugees. Refugees cannot be sent back to their countries if it puts them at risk. Countries have a legal obligation to let refugees in and protect them. But even in a safe country, life as a refugee can be daunting. Refugees may continue to deal with trauma. Some are separated from their family and long to reunite with loved ones. There may be challenges related to adapting to a new environment. Host countries can provide assistance to learn the language and to adapt to cultural and other differences. But when does someone stop being a refugee? Some refugees can return home if the situation in their country becomes safe enough. Others will remain and integrate in their host countries. With the right support, refugees can successfully integrate and make a new life for themselves. Some refugees eventually even become citizens of their host country.
Okay, and as you can see, there are some other videos as well. So depending on the time that you have in class, you might want to check out some of these other videos. Where do refugees come from? Other types of groups, internally displaced people, etc. So I recommend just checking those out when you have some time. All right, let's go ahead and go back to the PPT now. So while the students are watching the video, I would give them these questions as a handout. You could also put them up on another board if you wanted to, or write them on a whiteboard. These are the questions right here. So what is the word for refugee in your first language? What is a refugee? What are some things that refugees experience? What does it mean to flee? What does persecution mean? What are some dangers that refugees face in their home countries and on their journey to safety? What is trauma? Do you think it's easy for refugees to adapt to their new countries? What are some challenges that they might face? And then finally, the last one right here. What do you know about refugees living in your country? And if students aren't able to answer all of the questions, that's okay. If you allow students to use their computers or cell phones, you could have them look up some answers as well if you're okay with that. But I would really encourage the students to discuss these in depth in their groups and then go over them together as a class. All right, on to the next slide right here. Refugees around the world. I would also give the students some information on key statistics related to refugees, but first, see what they already know or what they think the correct answers are. So create a cell phone app game or a class quiz game based on the fact sheets below. Go over the data with the students after doing the quiz. And the 2 fact sheets are 10 facts about refugees, and then the UNHCR Teaching About Refugees 2021 fact sheet. So let's just take a look at those very quickly so you can see what that content includes. So this is the 10 facts about refugees right here. You can see some different ones listed. Right? And then the other one is this one right here, fact sheets on refugees, asylum seekers, internally displaced people, and stateless persons. So we have some key statistics right here. So make up some quiz questions pertaining to these fact sheets. And then after the students complete the quiz, you can go over these fact sheets together and just go through the key statistics with your students, all right? So this is just a sample quiz. You can make it longer, shorter if you want. True or false? 2 out of 5 refugees live in countries bordering their homelands. That's false. Most refugees live in refugee camps. Also false. And of course, I wouldn't give the students the answers right away, but I've posted them here for you. True or false? 20% of the world's refugees are children. It's much higher than that. And true or false, arrivals to Europe have increased significantly. All right, so just some sample questions here to get the students a little engaged, and they like games too, probably. All right, I would also go over some key vocabulary related to this topic. So obviously the word refugee is very important, but students also need to know about similar terms that they might read about in newspaper articles or hear about in the news. So migrants, asylum seekers, and internally displaced people. So we've got some complex vocabulary here. And I might show them this from the UNHCR, and it shows clearly in each category the differences between each group. So refugees, where outside his or her country, why they're fleeing danger, war, persecution. Return, in danger if they return to their home countries, and rights, cannot be returned. And then we have migrants here as well. So we have outside of their country, fleeing for other reasons. They could return, really depends on migration laws in terms of their rights. Asylum seekers, this is outside of his or her country. Reasons for fleeing are not clear yet. The return really depends on the outcome procedure. Their rights really depends on the outcome procedure as well. And then finally, internally displaced people. This would be inside of his or her country. And I would explain too that a lot of people are internally displaced in some particular countries. Why? Fleeing danger, war, persecution. You could give them some examples of locations on the map. Return, they're in danger if they return because of war or conflict or other problems. And rights, they're still under local laws or authority. So this is a nice visual to kind of distinguish each group here. All right, and then moving on, I would give the students a reading activity. I'd give them about 15 minutes to read this article Or if you want to save time, you could give this to them as a homework assignment. And the title of the article is 13 Powerful Refugee Stories from Around the World. So there are nice visuals on this article and just a paragraph or two for each person discussed in this article. So the vocabulary is not too difficult, and the students get to read about different people's experiences as refugees. It's a powerful reading for them, and they can also read about different people that have experienced life as a refugee around the world. And then after they finish the reading, I would have them do a little reflection activity as a journal and some questions maybe they could answer. What did you learn? You could keep it very basic. What questions do you have? What other thoughts do you have? And you can keep this kind of private if you want. You could also have the students turn in their journals. It's up to you. But I would give them approximately 10 to 15 minutes to write down their thoughts. Also, you can make this a homework assignment if you'd like. But I think it's nice to just give students some time to reflect and also practice their writing skills. All right, next, it's important to have group activities, especially for communication. So have students research the following and create a mini report or a mini presentation on the following. You can modify these questions. These are just some that I came up with. So what happens to refugees when they arrive in your country? And the students do some research. Once again, they can use their phones or computers. They can also do this at home. Find 3 local, state, provincial, regional, national, or international organizations that support refugees. What type of support do they provide? Find 1 news article about refugees in your local area, state, province, region. You can modify that, or country. What did you learn? What types of support do you think refugees need in your local community? And then finally, what can be done to better support refugees internationally? So getting students to collaborate, they can share their answers as a little mini written report. They could also do just a little informal mini presentation where one group member shares all of the answers, or they can divide the questions and share what they came up with. All right, next. Some key takeaways, kind of like a little reflection activity. So at the end of class, I would have students write down 3 things that they learned about refugees in the lesson, and also have them answer the question, what is one way that we can help refugees in our own countries or in other countries? You can give them a little sticky note, an index card. You could have a few students share these at the end of class. You could collect them as an exit ticket from the classroom. It's up to you. All right, and then a homework assignment, and this is modified from the UNHCR. They have some great resources related to teaching about refugees. So this is basically from them. I just modified it a bit. So first, discuss these organizations with your students. So UNHCR and other United Nations organizations, governments and regional organizations like the EU, NGOs, people in your local community. You can give a list to the students perhaps, and then have the students make a list of 10 things that they can do for refugees, either individually or collectively, as a school, in society, as a community. Look up if there are any organizations helping refugees in your community, and ask them if they want to help and set up volunteer actions, because we want learning to be impactful, not just learning and taking in the information, but actually using information to benefit society, and developing student citizenship skills, making them better adults or better citizens in the future if you're looking at teenagers. What resources would you need? Which persons would you need to contact? And how could you organize things? And you can modify this. This is just a suggestion for a homework assignment. And then finally, there are loads of other resources. I know we're kind of limited with our time, but there's a UNHCR reading workshop, Be a Positive Messenger from the British Council. And I'm just going to show some of these to you briefly. And if you want to explore them more later, you can. So this is the UNHCR Refugee Reading Workshop. There are loads of resources here pertaining to different books that might be of interest to your students. You could choose this depending on the student's age or level. Another great activity from the British Council, this could be a group activity that you do in class, be a positive messenger. You could have students answer these questions in groups related to refugee experiences, or they could do this as an external homework assignment. This is a phenomenal research resource from UNHCR. There's loads of information, statistics, and data on refugees. There are also lesson plan videos and other materials that you can check out. Another great one, Refugee Stories, Mapping a Crisis. We have some lesson plans and handouts here that you could give to students. Another one, 8 educational resources to better understand the refugee crisis. And finally, some links to other resources pertaining to the global refugee crisis. So I recommend just exploring these when you have time. So this was just a little bit of information and a short lesson plan. You can make it longer or shorter depending on your students' needs. Thank you everyone for attending this presentation. And if you'd like additional information, feel free to reach out to me at leea@apsu.edu. Have a wonderful rest of the conference, everyone. Bye.